Okay, guys, so today we're going to read The Pearl. This is by John Steinbeck. Okay, now this is called a novella. Okay, a novella. Does anyone know what a novella is? She's close. It's got the word novel in it, right? So it is spelled Novella, novella, and it is related to a novel. Anybody? It means a short novel. A short novel. This book is it's like 90 pages, 90-ish pages. Okay. Today I've given you the first couple chapters, and we're only going to read like one chapter today. Now, before we start, I want to talk to y'all. I'm curious. Does anyone know how a pearl is formed? For real? You do.
Well, I don't know exactly how it's formed, but I know it's formed in a clamshell.
Okay, that's where it's formed. But okay, you, ma'am. You.
Doesn't like the sand get in it for like a long time in the case of pearl?
Yeah, what happens is sand gets into like the flesh of the oyster or whatever, and it kind of causes an infection. And the oyster then puts a coating around this gritty piece of sand, okay? I guess like a scab. And it continues coating until one day it pops out. And that's how we get pearls, for real. So we're basically, if your boyfriend or whatever gives you a pearl necklace, he's just giving you a necklace of oyster scabs. All right? Sounds nice. Romantic. All right, so let's take a look at this chapter 1. Okay? First of all, in every story, poem, book, whatever, what is 99% of the time, what does the author start with? The setting. That's exactly right. So that's what we're about to start with. So I want you just pay attention to the setting. We'll stop and discuss it occasionally. Kino awakened in the near dark. The stars still shone, and the day had drawn only a pale watch of light in the lower sky to the east. The roosters had been crowing for some time, and the early pigs were already beginning their ceaseless turning of twigs and bits of wood to see whether anything to eat had been overlooked. Outside the brush house in the tuna clump, a covey of little birds chittered and flurried with their wings. Let's stop there. What time of day is it?
Night.
No?
Near dark is noon.
It says near dark.
Noon.
Noon is near dark.
It does.
Let's keep going. Kino's eyes opened, and he looked first at the lightning square, which was the door, and then he looked at the hanging box where Coyotito slept. And last, he turned to his wife, Juana, who lay beside him on the mat, her blue head shawl over her nose and over her breasts and around the small of her back. Juana's eyes were open too. Kino could never remember seeing them closed when he awakened. Her dark eyes made little reflected stars. She was looking at him as she was always looking at him when he awakened. Now I'm going to ask you again, what time of day is it?
Morning.
It's morning, guys. It's morning. That's why they just opened their eyes. Who was up first? Kino or Juana? Nope.
Juana.
Juana, y'all. It says she was looking at him. All right, keep going.
With her eyes open.
Kino heard the little splash of morning waves on the beach. Uh-oh, what do they live near?
A beach.
There you go.
/ farm.
It was very good. Kino closed his eyes again to listen to his music. Perhaps he alone did this, and perhaps all of his people did it. His people had once been great makers of songs, so that everything they saw or thought or did or heard became a song. That was very long ago. The songs remained. Kino knew them, but no new songs were added. That does not mean that there were no personal songs. In Kino's head, there was a song now, clear and soft. And if he had been able to speak of it, he would have called it the song of the family. His blanket was over his nose to protect him from the dank air. His eyes flicked to a rustle beside him. It was Juana arising almost soundlessly. On her hard, bare feet, she went to the hanging box where Coyotito slept. And she leaned over and said a little reassuring word. Coyotito looked up for a moment and then closed his eyes and slept again. So let's stop there. We've got Kino. He's our protagonist, okay? He's the husband. What's his wife's name? No. Juana. Okay? And they have a baby. What's the baby's name?
Cantito.
That's Coyotito. Now look at the word Coyotito. Look at it right there. Which word does it look similar to?
Coyote.
It looks similar to coyote. You know, like the dog type thing, coyote. You know what? Tell them what Coyotito means. It means baby coyote. Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind for later in the story. Let's keep going. Juana went to the fire pit and uncovered a coal and fanned it alive while she broke little pieces of brush over it. Now Kino got up and wrapped his blanket about his head and nose and shoulders. He slipped his feet into his sandals and went outside to watch the dawn. Outside the door, he squatted down and gathered the blanket ends about his knees. He saw the specks of clouds flame high in the air, and a goat came near and sniffed at him and stared with its cold yellow eyes. Behind him, Juana's fire leaped into flame and threw spears of light through the chinks of the brush house wall and threw a wavering square of light out the door. A late moth blustered in to find the fire. The song of the family came now from behind Kino, and the rhythm of the family song was the grinding stone where Juana worked the corn for the morning cakes. The dawn came quickly now, a wash, a glow, a lightness, and then an explosion of fire as the sun arose out of the gulf. Kino looked down to cover his eyes from the glare. He could hear the pat of the corn cakes in the house and the rich smell of them on the cooking plate. The ants were busy on the ground, big black ones with shiny bodies and little dusty quick ants. Kino watched with the detachment of God while a dusty ant frantically tried to escape the sand trap an antlion had dug for him. A thin, timid dog came close and, at a soft word from Kino, curled up, arranged its tail neatly over its feet, and laid its chin delicately on the pile. It was a black dog with yellow gold spots where its eyebrows should have been. It was a morning like other mornings, and yet perfect among mornings. Kino heard the creak of the rope when Juana took Coyotito out of his hanging box and cleaned him and hammocked him in her shawl in a loop that placed him close to her breast. Kino could see these things without looking at them. Juana sang softly an ancient song that had only 3 notes and yet endless variety of interval. And this was part of the family song too. It was all part. Sometimes it rose to an aching chord that caught the throat, saying, "This is safety, this is warmth, this is the whole." Across the brush fence were other brush houses. The smoke came from them too, and the sound of breakfast, but those were other songs. Their pigs were other pigs, their wives were not Juana. Kino was young and strong, and his black hair hung over his brown forehead. His eyes were warm and fierce and bright, and his mustache was thin and coarse. He lowered his blanket from his nose now, for the dark, poisonous air was gone, and the yellow sunlight fell in the house. Near the brush fence, 2 roosters bowed and fainted at each other, with squared wings and neck feathers roughed out. It would be a clumsy fight. They were not game chickens. Kino watched them for a moment, and then his eyes went up to a flight of wild doves twinkling inland to the hills. The world was awake now, and Kino arose and went into his brush house. As he came through the door, Juana stood up from the glowing fire pit. She put Coyotito back in his hanging box, and then she combed her black hair and braided it in 2 braids and tied the ends with thin green ribbon. Kino squatted by the fire pit and rolled a hot corn cake and dipped it in sauce and ate it. He drank a little pulp, and that was breakfast. That was the only breakfast he had ever known outside of feast days and one incredible fiesta on cookies that had nearly killed him. When Kino had finished, Juana came back to the fire and ate her breakfast. They had spoken once, but there is no need for speech if it is only a habit anyway. Kino sighed with satisfaction, and that was conversation. Now we need to stop and talk about something. What is the most important part of a story? Any story? Most important part. If you do not have this, you do not have a story. What? The plot. No, that's the entire story as it is.
The characters?
It's not the characters. Good guess. What?
Climax.
Climax? Nope, we're getting closer. It's the conflict. Okay? Conflict is the problem. Now think about it like this, guys.
Isn't that the top of the mountain?
That's the climax, sir. Okay. The conflict is the problem of the story. The climax won't occur until the end. Okay?
Oh, that's the fall. Am I correct?
Okay.
Or the fall.
No, that's called falling action. Okay. Anyway, the conflict is the problem of the story. Think about it in school terms, right? You go to school, you come home, your mom or dad says, "How was school today?" You say, "Fine." They say, "What'd you do?" You say, "Nothing." That's the general answer. How was school? Fine. What'd you do? Nothing. Anything happen? No. Well, what happened? Nothing. What'd you do? I didn't do anything. That's it, right? Unless something bad happens at school. If there's a fight in the hallway or in the cafeteria or something, you go home and talk about that. Because that's exciting. Conflict. We want conflict. All right? We don't want to read about butterflies and ants living together in a beehive, and being friends. We don't want that. We want some fighting. All right? So we're about to have our problem, our conflict. All right, here we go. The sun was warming the brush house, breaking through its crevices in long streaks. And one of the streaks fell in the hanging box where Coyotito lay and on the ropes that held it. It was a tiny movement that drew their eyes to the hanging box. Kino and Juana froze in their positions. Down the rope that hung the baby's box from the roof support, a scorpion moved slowly, his stinging tail straight out behind him. He could whip it up in a flash of time. Kino's breath whistled in his nostrils, and he opened his mouth to stop it. And then the startled look was gone from him and the rigidity from his body. In his mind, a new song had come, the song of evil, the music of the enemy, of any foe of the family, a savage, secret, dangerous melody. And underneath, the song of the family cried plaintively. The scorpion moved delicately down the rope toward the box. Under her breath, Juana repeated an ancient magic to guard against such evil. And on top of that, she muttered a Hail Mary between clenched teeth. But Kino was in motion. His body glided quietly across the room, noiselessly and smoothly. His hands were in front of him, palms down. His eyes were on the scorpion. Beneath it in the hanging box, Coyotito laughed and reached up his hand toward it. Let's stop. Why would this little baby, Coyotito, reach his hand toward a scorpion? Because he didn't know what it is. Yeah, he's kind of interested. Oh, there's a strange little bug thing. I'll try and grab it. Bad idea. It sensed danger when Kino was almost within reach of it. It stopped, and its tail rose up over its back in little jerks, and the curved thorn on the tail's end glistened. Kino stood perfectly still. He could hear Juana whispering the old magic again, and he could hear the evil music of the enemy. He could not move until the scorpion moved, and it felt for the source of the death that was coming to it. Kino's hand went forward very slowly, very smoothly. The thorn tail jerked upright, and at that moment the laughing Coyotito shook the rope, and the scorpion fell. Kino's hand leaped to catch it, but it fell past his fingers, fell on the baby's shoulder, landed and struck. Then, snarling, Kino had it in his fingers, rubbing it to a paste in his hands. He threw it down and beat it into the earth floor with his fist, and Coyotito screamed with pain in his box. But Kino beat and stamped the enemy until it was only a fragment and a moist place in the dirt. His feet were bared, and fury flared in his eyes, and the song of the enemy roared in his ears. But Juana had the baby in her arms now. She found the puncture with redness starting from it already. She put her lips over the puncture and sucked hard and spat and sucked again while Coyotito screamed. What is Juana doing? Trying to suck out the venom, right? There you go. There you go. Kino hovered. He was helpless. He was in the way. When it says right there, Kino hovered, hovered means to like float off the ground. Is he really floating off the ground? What's it mean when it says he hovered?
He's standing over.
Just kind of stand him over and looking like, not really being able to do anything, right? Good. Zippity-dee. The screams of the baby brought the neighbors. Out of their brush houses they poured. Kino's brother, Juan Tomas, and his fat wife, Apollonia, and their 4 children crowded in the door and blocked the entrance, while behind them others tried to look in, and one small boy crawled among legs to have a look, and those in front passed the word back to those behind. Scorpion, the baby has been stung. Juana stopped sucking the puncture for a moment. The little hole was slightly enlarged and its edges whitened from the sucking, but the red swelling extended farther around it in a hard lymphatic mound. And all of these people knew about the scorpion. An adult might be very ill from the sting, but a baby could easily die from the poison. First, they knew, would come swelling and fever and tightened throat, and then cramps in the stomach, and then Coyotito might die if enough of the poison had gone in. But the stinging pain of the bite was going away. Coyotito's screams turned to moans. Kino had wondered often at the iron in his patient, fragile wife. She who was obedient and respectful and cheerful and patient. She could arch her back in child pain with hardly a cry. She could stand fatigue and hunger almost better than Kino himself. In the canoe, she was like a strong man, and she did a most surprising thing. The doctor, she said. Go to get the doctor. The word was passed out among the neighbors where they stood close packed in the little yard behind the brush fence. They repeated among themselves, Juana wants the doctor. A wonderful thing, a memorable thing to want the doctor. To get him would be a remarkable thing. The doctor never came to the cluster of brush houses. Why should he? When he had more than he could do to take care of the rich people who lived in the stone and plaster houses of the town. So why doesn't the doctor ever come to their section of town?
Because they don't have money.
Because they don't have money. That's exactly right. So we're finding something out about the doctor, and we haven't even met him. What we're finding out is
He's greedy.
he's greedy. That's exactly right. He would not come, the people in the yard said. He would not come, the people in the door said. And the thought got into Kino. The doctor would not come, Kino said to Juana. She looked up at him, her eyes as cold as the eyes of a lioness. This was Juana's first baby. This was nearly everything there was in Juana's world. And now Kino saw her determination, and the music of the family sounded in his head with a steely tone. Then we will go to him, Juana said. And with one hand, she arranged her dark blue shawl and made of one end of a sling to hold the moaning baby, and the other end of it a shade over his eyes to protect him from the light. The people in the door pushed against those behind to let her through. Kino followed her. They went out the gate to the rutted path, and the neighbors followed them. The thing had become a neighborhood affair. They made a quick, soft-footed procession into the center of the town. First, Juana and Kino, and behind them, Juan Tomas and Apollonia, her big stomach jiggling with the strenuous pace. Then all the neighbors with the children trotting on the flanks, and the yellow sun threw their black shadows ahead of them so that they walked on their own shadows. So let's stop there. So Kino and Juana are taking Coyotito to the doctor, and all the neighbors are following along. Why? Say it. The answer is they're nosy. That's exactly right. And then it says, listen, the yellow sun threw their black shadows ahead of them so that they walked on their own shadows. Now, the author here, we know that a shadow is black or dark colored. I mean, that's just obvious, right? But the author specifically calls the neighbor's shadows black. Okay? Now, one of our words was symbolism. When one thing is used to represent something else. And we have a lot of color symbolism in this story. Color symbolism. What would black represent? And you really don't know the neighbors, but I want you to start paying attention to this kind of stuff. Black generally will represent one of two things.
Bad.
Evil. That's one, and that's the one with the neighbor. It also represents like death or mourning, like you wear a dark color to a funeral. Okay? So keep that in mind. By the way, just out of curiosity, what would the color red represent?
Angry.
Anger. Red represents anger. Let's keep going. They came to the place where the brush houses stopped, and the city of stone and plaster began. The city of harsh outer walls and inner cool gardens where a little water played in the bougainvillea crusted the walls with purple and brick red and white. They heard from the secret gardens the singing of caged birds and heard the splash of cooling water on hot flagstones. The procession crossed the blinding plaza and passed in front of the church. It had grown now, and on the outskirts, the hurrying newcomers were being softly informed how the baby had been stung by a scorpion, how the father and mother were taking it to the doctor. And the newcomers, particularly the beggars from the front of the church, who were great experts in financial analysis. Pay attention to these beggars, by the way. These beggars, where it says great experts in financial analysis, looked at Juana's old blue skirt, saw the tears in her shawl, appraised the green ribbon on her braids, read the age of Kino's blanket and the 1,000 washings of his clothes, and set them down as poverty people, and went along to see what kind of drama might develop. But this is important about the beggars. The 4 beggars in the front of the church knew everything in the town. They were students of the expressions of young women as they went into confession. They saw them as they came out and read the nature of the sin. They knew every little scandal and some very big crimes. They slept at their posts in the shadow of the church, so that no one crept in for consolation without their knowledge. Stop. Why would the beggars sleep right there in the shadow of the church? Why would they stay right by the church? This is kind of a tough one.
So they get money?
Well, obviously, they're beggars, so they want people to give them money. But it was more of a blackmail issue, okay? They would see people going into church to, say, confess. And, let's say you're a woman and you just showed up in the middle of the day and without your husband and you're confessing some sins. Where's your husband? Does your husband know that you're here? Does your husband know what you did? That kind of stuff. So, no, he doesn't, and here's some money to shut up about it. Understand? It's more of a blackmail. By the way, it also says here, they slept in the shadow of the church. The shadow is dark. Dark represents evil. Is this a good church? Remember that. Let's keep going. They knew and they knew the doctor. They knew his ignorance, his cruelty, his avarice, his appetites, his sins. They knew his clumsy abortions and the little brown pennies he gave sparingly for alms. They had seen his corpses go into the church. And since early mass was over and business was slow, they followed the procession. These endless searchers after perfect knowledge of their fellow men to see what the fat, lazy doctor would do about an indigent baby with a scorpion bite. The scurrying procession came at last to the big gate in the wall of the doctor's house. They could hear the splashing water and the singing of caged birds and the sweep of the long brooms on the flagstones, and they could smell the frying of good bacon from the doctor's house. Kino hesitated a moment, and get this. See, this doesn't sound familiar. Kino hesitated a moment. The doctor was not of his people. The doctor was of a race which for nearly 400 years had beaten and starved and robbed and despised Kino's race, and frightened it too, so that the indigene came humbly to the door. And as always, when he came near to one of this race, Kino felt weak and afraid and angry at the same time. Rage and terror went together. He could kill the doctor more easily than he could talk to him. For all the doctor's race spoke to all of Kino's race as though they were simple animals. So let's stop there. Do you think Kino wants to ask this guy for help? I would think not.
As it says, you would rather kill the dude than ask for help from him.
That's right. But why is he biting his tongue and asking for help?
Because there's a higher chance of the baby dying without a doctor's help than with the doctor's help.
You do a lot of things when it's your kid. Y'all understand that one day. And as Kino raised his right hand to the iron ring knocker on the gate, rage swelled in him, and the pounding music of the enemy beat in his ears, and his lips drew tight against his teeth. But with his left hand, he reached to take off his hat. The iron ring pounded against the gate. Kino took off his hat and stood waiting. Coyotito moaned a little in Juana's arms, and she spoke softly to him. The procession crowded close, the better to see and hear. After a moment, the big gate opened a few inches. Kino could see the green coolness of the garden and little splashing fountain through the opening. The man who looked out at him was one of his own race. Kino spoke to him in the old language. The little one, the firstborn, has been poisoned by the scorpion, Kino said. He requires the skill of the healer. The gate closed a little, and the servant refused to speak in the old language. A little moment, he said. I go to inform myself. He closed the gate and stood the bolt home. The glaring sun threw the bunched shadows of the people blackly on the wall. In his chamber, the doctor sat up in his high bed. He had on his dressing gown of red-watered silk that had come from Paris, a little tight over the chest now if it was buttoned. On his lap was a silver tray with a silver chocolate pot and a tiny cup of eggshell china, so delicate that it looked silly when he lifted it with his big hand, lifted it with the tips of thumb and forefinger, and spread the 3 other fingers wide to keep them out of the way. His eyes, get this, his eyes rested in puffy little hammocks of flesh, and his mouth drooped with discontent. He was growing very stout, and his voice was hoarse with the fat that pressed on his throat. This doctor is so overweight that his throat is even fat, and it makes him talk funny. Beside him, on a table, was a small oriental gong and a bowl of cigarettes. The furnishings of the room were heavy and dark and gloomy. The pictures were religious. Even the large tinted photograph of his dead wife, who, if masses willed and paid for out of her own estate could do it, was in heaven. The doctor had once, for a short time, been part of a great world, and his whole subsequent life was memory and longing for France. That, he said, was civilized living, by which he meant that on a small income he'd been able to keep a mistress and eat in restaurants. He poured the second cup of chocolate and crumbled a sweet biscuit in his fingers. The servant from the gate came to the open door and stood waiting to be noticed. Yes, the doctor asked. It is a little Indian with a baby. He says a scorpion stung it. The doctor put his cup down gently before he let his anger rise. Have I nothing better to do than cure insect bites for little Indians? I am a doctor, not a veterinary. When he says, I am a doctor, not a veterinary, what is he saying about Keno's family?
Animals.
They're animals. Good, guys, good. Yes, patron, said the servant. Has he any money? The doctor demanded. No, they never have any money. I alone in the world, am supposed to work for nothing, and I am tired of it. See if he has any money. At the gate, the servant opened the door a trifle and looked out at the waiting people. This time he spoke in the old language. Have you money to pay for the treatment? Now Keno reached into a secret place somewhere under his blanket. See what he's going to pull out. Get this. He brought out a paper folded many times. Crease by crease he unfolded it until at last there came to view 8 small misshapen seed pearls, as ugly and gray as little ulcers, flattened and almost valueless. The servant took the paper and closed the gate again, but this time he was not gone long. He opened the gate just wide enough to pass the paper back. So what did Keno give the servant to give the doctor to pay for the...
A pearl.
Not a pearl. How many? 8.
8.
And it said, small, misshapen seed pearls. Ugly and gray as ulcers. You think they're worth much? What do you think the doctor's going to do? Get out of here, right? Keep going. The doctor has gone out, he said. He was called to a serious case. And he shut the door quickly out of shame. And now a wave of shame went over the whole procession. They melted away. The beggars went back to the church steps. The stragglers moved off and the neighbors departed so that the public shaming of Keno would not be in their eyes. How did the neighbors feel for Keno? They felt embarrassed for him. Yeah, definitely. For a long time, Keno stood in front of the gate with Juana beside him. Slowly, he put his suppliant hat on his head. Then, without warning, he struck the gate a crushing blow with his fist. He looked down in wonder at his split knuckles and at the blood that flowed down between his fingers. So he punches the gate, hand starts bleeding, blood is red. Which emotion does red represent? Obviously, anger. Okay, we'll pick up there tomorrow. Thank you for your help.